Our journey begins. It's day 54, July 24, 2024. And I'm going to try to get into potentially the movement Genesis, the movement Constitution, and these narratives. The narratives are going to be tough, so they're going to be gradually building up these narratives. And hopefully I'll be able to provide a better summary of what I end up working on than I did yesterday. Yesterday was a pretty short summary. All right, thank you. All right, so I started off by I think I did a couple different things. Basically, I thought through how you would do the ownership of narratives. Essentially, John Vervaeke was saying that narratives should not be top down, and that people should not, like, the next thing after religions is going to be people doing practices of meaning and the narratives resulting from that. And then here I am writing narratives and expecting that to sort of inspire meaning. And so I was like, well, is that wrong? And then I was like, well, actually, like, I am currently engaged with a meaning practice, and I have been for several years. And so this whole thought process, all of these narratives are actually a result of that practice. And so it is still meant to be like an inspiring type of situation, and just like the initial stories. And then I think after that, I think I thought about this, but I did not write this down. Are meant to be the initial stories. And then the movement Genesis will create more stories and better stories and more narratives and all of that stuff. I thought through a couple other thoughts from yesterday and sort of organized them. I reorganized these narratives based on trying to figure out a general outline. So I did write the general outline of how I think all of these stories could fit together in a really interesting way. And then I started thinking through the characters, kind of mapping out what the different characters would do. And I'm going to need to figure out the character arcs, but I'm just sort of starting to think through the characters. And I had a couple different thoughts here during my walk. So they're interesting. I'll have to think through them more probably tomorrow. But yeah, basically, I pulled this narrative out of the appendix, and I think you kind of have to start with this, because this is sort of foundational, in that you have to be, if you're going to listen to any story, basically, you have to start by saying, well, you could be wrong, and you can't know anything to be for certain. Because if you don't, then people just read a little bit of the story and are like, oh, well, that's wrong because I believe this or whatever. And so I think that has to be part of the initial story. I'm not exactly sure how to make that an interesting part of the initial story. But then I thought, well, then you could go into the choice, and then the problems of the world, and then sort of start with the movement Genesis. And while you're doing that, you're thinking through it, if it's a good idea to strive for the evolution of and the evolving positively of humanity's consciousness, and then determining like the actual best future that we're going for, and then sort of exploring what a life would look like in the movement and how self-organization would work, and then ultimately like the finalized idea Because here you'd be figuring it out, and you sort of as a reader, you would be thinking through like, yeah, that makes sense. And so as you build these outcomes, then when you get to the actual idea, which is like the culmination of those outcomes, then it makes sense, and you're like totally on board with it. Whereas if you just had this first, and then you're trying to back it up with these stories, that might not work as well. And then you'd have the call to action, and then meaning, and then the ultimate inspiration, which is sort of like the story that really people can really, it's interesting to them and really makes them question and think about life. So then I kind of moved my story to the appendix section because it is important that I share my story so that people know what my intentions are. But it doesn't necessarily need to be a core part of the narratives of this whole idea. So it's been really good. I've been thinking a lot about how to actually like have the story. Like, how exactly would you interact with these ideas of the movement? How would you have the different characters? How would the conversation go? How would you make it interesting? How would you make it such that people would actually be genuinely interested in these stories if they're mostly distracted by the current world issues and everything? And I think it can be done. I think I am making progress slowly, and these are like potentially world-changing things. So it's understandable that it's taking time, and I feel like if nothing else, if I can have these narratives for myself as sort of a summary of what I'm actually thinking, that would be fine. But I think that they can be a lot more than that as well. All right, thank you.